Hey, it is any old gamer here with the long overdue rune cleanup video, guys. So that's right, today we're going to be talking about rune cleanup. Now, before we jump into it, a real quick note, this video is a follow-up to the rune evaluation video. If you haven't watched that yet, I'm going to put an info card on the screen. Make sure you do, because that really helps you kind of set up for the broader rune cleanup. Now, what we're going to be talking about today is basically how you clean up your rune inventory after you've already evaluated all the runes and your rune inventory is just full. To that end, I've put a few rules on the screen. They're above my head. Hope you guys like the new layout. And you'll see on the screen, the first rule is use it before you lose it. And pretty straightforward. All this rule means is go ahead and rune whatever monsters you can before you start selling stuff. Now, there's a big caveat to that. That is that you should not be putting your monsters in builds that are just not good enough for you. And by that I mean pretty much it's all going to depend on your stage of game, but let's say that you're in a Guardian 1, a mid-Guardian 1 guild, and most of your monsters are around 200 speed. Building a monster at 120 speed is probably not going to do it for you unless it's like a Fat Lucian, right? The same time, building a Swift monster at 230 speed, if it's an attack bar booster, maybe not going to do it for you. But if you're in Conqueror 2, maybe that's enough. So you do have to know kind of the rune stat, or kind of the monster stat targets that you have for your stage of game, and then build monsters to those standards. So I'm going to show you guys a quick rule of thumb in the Summoner's War Optimizer. For those of you who are not familiar with the Optimizer, I'm going to put a link on screen that'll show you how to install it. It's just basically a way, it's a Windows 10 only program that allows you to see all the stats of your monsters and helps you with your monster builds. So a quick rule of thumb is to go into the Optimizer, sort by efficiency, and then I go through to about my 50th monster, which is the bottom of the 5th page. It depends, again, on your stage of game, how many monsters you have built. But as a general rule, I think about 50 monsters is right. That's going to cover kind of your siege box and your PvE monsters. So any new monster you build should be at least as good as your 50th best monster. That's the rule that I look for. Now, efficiency is not the be-all, end-all metric. There are monsters in my box that are, you know, on page 25, like my Copper is not super efficient, but he serves a specific role. But for the most part, this gives you a really good guideline of kind of where you are, what your overall monster builds are, and what you should be targeting for. So you can see my 50th monster is 98.5% efficiency. I'm an endgame player, so if your 50th is 80% efficiency, then that's about what you're shooting for in new builds. Now, you do need to adjust a little bit for that, to the extent that if the runes are ungrinded, then you might want to look at how good the builds will be after they're grinded, and that kind of ties back to the potential video. But the overall point here is simply that you want to build as many monsters as you can, putting runes on them before you start selling stuff, but you only want to put them in builds that are good enough for you to use. Now, the reason for this is pretty straightforward. Imagine that you build a monster in total garbage runes, and it's got 5 awful runes and 1 amazing rune, but the build itself is not good enough because of those 5 bad runes. You'll never want to use that monster because you always lose with it, and you'll forget that that super OP rune is on that monster, and it will just sit there collecting dust forever. Now, the second rule is to check your unenchanted runes. So the way I do this is I actually come out here to all runes, I go to slot 1, and then I go power up level, and I just scroll to the very bottom. Now you guys can see all my runes are at plus 12. This is something that I do strongly recommend. If you have runes in your inventory that are good enough to keep, you want to take them to 3, and then 6, and then 9, and eventually 12 as you can afford it. I know mana is always a crunch, but it is a very important long-term goal, because you don't really know what the final product of those runes are going to look like until you hit plus 12. So all of my runes right now are plus 12, but the way I do it is I go through and I farm for a while. Usually I farm 5 or 6 dungeon runs until I've got up to my 790 runes, and then I come in here and I just basically sell off everything that I can't use, and then I test inscribe the stuff that I can. The test inscriptions I usually just take to like plus 6 or plus 9 because it's so time consuming, and then my rune inventory will build up throughout the week, and then when I do have a couple of hours, I sit there and plus 12 everything, and then I do actually sell the runes that go to plus 12 and don't enchant well enough, or I sell them at 9 or 6 if they don't enchant well enough. So I would recommend following a process something like that, whatever process works for your schedule, but before you start a rune cleanup, you need to make sure that you've checked every rune that's on Enchanted, taken it as far as you can, whether that's 3, 6, 9, or 12, take it as far as you can, as far as your mana allows, but that way you'll know the quality of all your runes, and you're not just evaluating the plus 12 stuff, you're evaluating everything at once. So, the next rule that you're going to see is to go set by set, slot by slot, and that's not a typo, unfortunately. In order to give myself the ability to build a monster at any time, yesterday, guys, I pulled Xyros. It was so funny. I said on stream I needed a Xyros in my life, and I also said on stream it was nearly impossible for me to pull new Nat 5s, and then I pulled Xyros that night. It was crazy, off like 40 scrolls too. It was crazy. But so yesterday I pulled the Xyros, and I want to be able to build him. You never know when you're going to pull a new monster. So in order to build a new monster, you want to have a balanced variety of runes. What I shoot for is to have no more than about 7 runes per slot per set. Obviously, you'll have a few less of the ally runes, which are the ones that boost ally effects, like fight runes boost attack, right? So you'll have a few less of those usually just because we don't farm them as much. So basically, we have 17 sets. You have 6 slots per set, so 17 times 6 is 102, and if you have 7 runes per slot, that's 714. That's a little over the highest we want to be. So usually you're not going to have the full 7 per, but that's a really good guideline. So I do go set by set, slot by slot. Then I will come over here into the optimizer, and I will come out to the runes tab, which you guys can see is right here, this runes tab. I will type in energy, I will type in slot 1, I will come here and I will mark inventory only, and then I will come down and look at the 2 runes I have. And as I look at these, I can see that these are both actually decent runes. So for myself personally, I usually like to have somewhere around 100% efficiency runes after the runes are gemmed and grinded, at a lowest, obviously. That's from my own account, and again, efficiency is not the be-all, end-all, it's just a general guideline. So if I had a 24 crit rate rune here, I'd be keeping it no matter the efficiency. But it does give you a good, just kind of a quick point of reference. And then I come back over to the game, and I go to energy slot 2. And now we've got a problem. Now we've got, it's not a problem, but now we've got more runes than we want. We've got 10 runes. So now we're actually going to get into more of the cleanup process, which means we come back over here to swap. We put in slot 2. And we come down and we look at our list of runes. Now, this is a good time to mention that our standards, or at least my standards, tend to be higher the less likely I am to use a rune set. So, for example, I use more violent than anything. I use, my second most that I use is will. My third most that I use is probably rage or despair or swift. Those 3 are all about equal. And that's what I'm saying off the top of my head. But if I really want to know for sure, I can come into the optimizer again. And we scroll down to this tab right here that shows rune statistics. And we can actually see how many runes we're using. But we are going to come back over here to the rune chart. So knowing that we value energy less means our standards are a little bit higher. So the first thing we're going to do is sort by reverse efficiency. We want to look at the least efficient runes first. Now, it does not mean that we're going to be selling these runes automatically. They may be less efficient because they're not gemmed or grinded, or there may be other runes that don't synergize well. But again, good rule of thumb. So the least efficient slot 2 I have, it's a speed rune with 27 HP, crit rate, crit damage, and the defense is gemmable to attack. This rune will come in somewhere close to 100% efficiency once it's all gemmed and grinded. And if we want to know exactly what it is, we can actually just edit this up here. So we can assume that we'll gem and grind 16 attack. We'll bring the HP to 34. And if we were to save that, it's 95% efficiency. So for me, for an energy rune, this is actually a pretty low efficiency rune. Now, the big thing I have to really decide now is it worth a gem and 2 grinds, and especially the gem, because those are hard to come by, to now create a rune that does not synergize super well, because it's got this HP with crit rate, crit damage, so it's not super synergized. And it'd be even less synergized if I changed this attack to defense, right? The other thing I could do is maybe leave that defense flat and grind it and gem out the crit damage. So if we wanted to go that route, we would turn this crit damage into 16% defense, and we would turn this attack percent into defense flat, and we would call it about 30 after it was grinded, and we can see that's an even less efficient rune. So for me, what I'm looking at is this rune is just honestly not going to be worth investing a gem into because it's not going to be good enough for me to use. You should not be, if you're early game, you should not be holding your runes to the standard of the streamers' videos that you're watching. If you're mid-game, you probably shouldn't be doing that either. You should be comparing your runes to your other runes. This is all about comparing your runes to what else you have. So when I'm looking at this list right here, I'm literally looking at the 10 runes I have and picking the 3 worst out of that 10. So keep that in mind. It's not about like, are my runes as good as XG's, or if it's me, are my runes as good as say Shizo's? It's just, what are the 7 best runes I have for this slot? I sell the 3 worst runes, and now I've given myself some space to go out and farm and incrementally upgrade. And the next time I do a cleanup, I'll have 10 runes in this slot again. I'll sell the 3 worst, and the odds are that I've kept one of the new ones and sold one of the old ones, and I've improved my account a little bit overall. So with that said, this rune for me is definitely going to be a sell. So we're going to come back over here. We're going to sort out by defense flat. We're going to go ahead and just sell this rune. And one other thing you might have noticed is I've got 6 speed runes, so I'm not very well balanced overall in this energy slot too. I've only got, it looks like, 2 attack runes and no HP or defense runes. Defense slot 2, not super valuable. Energy slot 2 HP can be really useful. So I do like to have a little bit more balance in my rune set as well. And that brings us to point number 5, which is that you're obviously going to keep some more Violent and Will, maybe than in other sets, but you may also keep some additional 2, 4, 6. Like, if you have a good mix, because you can, like, you know, for example, we could have HP, attack, speed, and defense. If I have 3 good runes of each, I probably don't want to bring myself lower than that. At least not for the HP and the speed. So let's say I kept the best 2 defense, the best 2 attack, the best 3 speed, and the best 3 HP. That's 10 runes. Now, usually it's not going to work out so that you have that option, but sometimes it does, and if that's the case, then with those 2, 4, 6, you may keep a little bit extra. And now I can just compare my next 9 runes to each other. So we're going to come back here, we're going to look at our next lowest efficiency rune. That is an attack percent rune, but it's got 21 speed, so we're going to keep that one. Our next least efficient rune is this slot 2. It's a rare rune with defense innate. It's already gemmed and grinded at 82% efficiency, so this one's a really easy sell for us. I have no idea why I kept that, guys, and I'm probably going to leave this in the video because I bet you everybody has experienced that moment at some point, like, what the hell is this rune doing in my account? I have no idea. But anyway, we are going to come back over here, we're going to delete this one, and then we're going to come through and we're going to find our last sell. So we're going to do that process slot by slot. So we are going to come, after we're done with our slot 2s, we're going to come back over to the game. We're going to go energy 3, then we're going to go energy 4, and once we're done 5 and 6, once we're done with our energies, we're going to click this pull down menu, we're going to go to guard, and we're going to repeat this process. Now, at a certain point, you are going to find the decision making is not as easy as it was for me with those energy runes. For me, this always happens with Violent. What usually happens is that all my Violent runes are extremely similar to each other, and it's really hard for, plus with Violent, we need such a wide, diverse range of builds. Like, you need some fast monsters, some tanky, some resistance. So I really sometimes struggle with deciding which Violent runes to sell. So as you're going through your runes, if you're stuck on which ones that you want to get rid of, the first thing to do is ask yourself if the rune has a use case. So we're going to come back over here to the optimizer. We're going to take a look at our Violent 1 runes. When we look at our lowest efficiency rune, we come up with this rune right here. It's 78% efficiency. It's got resistance gemmed in. It's triple grindable. This is actually a good rune. Even though you guys are probably looking at the rare, it rolled so well. It's going to be 100% 20 speed rune. This for me is an absolute keep. So then we look at the next rune. Now we've got 20 attack, 5 HP, 12 speed, 5 crit rate. So this rune is actually slightly more efficient than the rune above it, right? But when I look at this rune and I ask myself what's the use case, I struggle with that a little bit more. The main use case I can make for it is that it's got a really high attack for a Violent slot 1. It does have crit rate and speed, so it synergizes. It's going to have efficiency. But if I think about it a step further and I think, where can I actually use this that it's going to be better than another rune? I struggle with that a little bit more because it's going to be a little bit too slow for me to want to use it on a PvP monster. but it doesn't have crit damage or enough crit rate for me to want to use it on a PvE monster. So, and again, we're just talking about my account right now, but for my account, I don't necessarily have a use case for this rune, even though this rune is slightly more efficient than the one above it. And I know this is kind of obvious, it's got more speed, right? But even though this is slightly more efficient than the one above it, the actual use case tells me I'm going to struggle to use this rune. So for me, this becomes my first sell. And I'm selling it in part because I've got 13 slot 1 violent runes, and if you look at the runes, you see so many of them are so similar. So now let's come back over to the game, and let's take a look at how many slot 3 violent runes we have. We have even more. But let's take a look at how many slot 6 runes we have. We've got 2. So I've got 2 slot 6 runes. I've got 9 slot 2 runes, but all of these are different runes that are going to fit with different builds. So we've got 2 slot 6, we've got 9 slot 2, and yet we have 13 slot 1 and 14 slot 3. So it's very, very imbalanced. And you have to start making some decisions to start selling off the worst rune of the bunch, even if it's a good rune. And so that brings us back over to this slot 1, where I'm looking at this rune with 12 speed, 5 crit rate, 20 attack. It is a good rune. It's a good rune even for my account. If I were to grind this and gem the crit rate, it would be over 100% efficiency. It is a legitimate good rune. But the use case tells me that it will sit in my inventory from now until the day I die because I don't have enough slot 6 runes. And in the time that I'm farming out more slot 6s, I will definitely farm out better slot 1s. This rune is just not as good as the runes that are coming, much less the runes that are down here lower in this list. And the reason I'm spending so much time on this is because it's hard to sell these runes, guys. It's hard for me to sell this rune. I don't want to sell this rune, so I'm going to ramble on in this video for 10 minutes and not sell it. I'm serious, guys. Nobody wants to sell these runes, but it will sit in my inventory forever. It's never going to justify me using those really rare violent gems and grinds because I'm never going to be able to use it. Now, the other thing that you want to do as part of this process, depending on the rune set, is you want to sort by the most important stat for that set. So, for example, rage runes really need crit rate, crit damage, attack. They don't need speed so much. Most of the time, you're using rage runes on monsters that are going to have some sort of setup. You may need some speed, but you don't usually need crazy speed. You definitely don't need it as much as you do on violent or swift or will, even, for example. So with rage runes, I would oftentimes reverse sort by crit rate and look for the runes that don't have crit rate. If I'm trying to make a decision on which rune is going to be stuck in my inventory forever, it's the rune that has no crit rate, because why would I use, and I mean, there's exceptions, obviously. If it's got 28 crit damage, I'll balance it out. But if it's just like a really efficient rune, but it has no crit rate, no crit damage, no attack, it's probably going to sit in my inventory forever, so that becomes a leading candidate for me to sell. Now, in the case of Violent or Swift, it's all about the speed, obviously, right? So if we're looking at a slot 1 Violent, these 2 runes right here, these 2 runes are kept because they're really high crit rate. These are basically PvE runes. The top one is really efficient, and then this one, 22 crit rate, is a little bit too rare to get rid of, so we're keeping these 2. This rune, on the other hand, is really not that good. Although it's got 14 crit rate, here's what we know. We know we've already got 2 runes up here that have more crit rate, and if we scroll down, we can see another one that has more crit rate and another one with about the same crit rate at 12. The 4 speed right here has to be regemmed into a higher amount of speed. So this is another rune. If I regem the speed and then I grind the attack and I regrind the HP and I grind the new speed, this will reach 100%. But I'm going to be investing a lot of really rare grinds and gems into a rune that still doesn't rise up to be as good as the other runes that are like it. I've already got faster runes. I've already got runes with more crit rate. I've already got runes with more efficiency. So although this rune by itself is not bad, it's not going to ever be as good as the other runes I have. And so in the effort of cleaning up my rune inventory, this becomes another target for me to sell. Now, one last thing I want to point out, I'm going to show you guys me actually selling this rune. Why? Because it's a plus 15 rune. I am not free to play. And if you are free to play, especially if you're not somebody who's been playing the game for many years or doesn't siege farm and your crystals are limited, mana may be a consideration. But keep in mind that the mana will come over time. The further along you get in the game, the higher your standards become for runes. The higher your standards are, the more runes you sell, the more mana is going to come back to you. For me, selling a plus 15 rune is not a huge deal because mana is not a huge concern. If you're an early game player or an early mid or mid game player, then you may want to consider that as part of your process for rune cleanup. So, for example, this rune that I was comparing right here, the one that I actually just sold that has 14 crit rate, was plus 15. But this rune down here that has 12 crit rate is plus 12. So if mana is a major consideration, then even though this rune is a little bit better, this might have been your sell target because maybe that tiny bit better it is was not worth the extra 500,000 to 1,000,000 mana for you to plus 15 a new rune. But keep in mind that neither of these runes is amazing. They're good runes. They add depth to the siege box. They will land up somewhere. They're not bad runes, but they're not like, oh my god, I can't replace that runes either. Now, rule number 7 is when you're looking at a rune and deciding if you should sell it, ask yourself, is this better than my worst rune? I talked about this in the progression guide as well. So in the broadest sense, when a new rune drops and you're deciding if you should get rid of it, you ask yourself, can this be an upgrade for me? Like, is there a use case? And then if it enchants well and I grind and I gem it, can this rune be better than the worst rune that I have right now? And then in the smaller sense, when you're doing an in-depth cleanup like this, you're asking yourself, is this rune better than my worst violent slot 1 rune? And at an even smaller level, so let's say I took out all the easy targets right here and I still have 13 runes and I just don't know what to do. So now we're going to bring that question, is this better than my worst rune, down to the lowest level possible, which is to group the runes that we have here into categories of similar runes. So we're going to sort by speed, and we're going to say these runes with 14, 15, 16 speed, they're all about the same speed. Now, if we look, you guys can see I like to keep, obviously, runes that can be grinded 3 times. So all of these are triple grindable. However, this one is kind of unique in that it's got 31 attack. The other 3 runes are all pretty much the same. So when I look at these 4 runes and I compare them to each other, ignoring efficiency for a minute, and just actually thinking about how functional the runes are, obviously this one with 16 speed, it's the fastest, making it the most useful. And then this one down here that's got the 16 crit damage with the crit rate innate, it's also a legend, making it a potential re-app target. This one's really useful. And then anything with 31 attack is super rare, so we will find a way to make this one useful. Probably just gem the crit rate into a higher crit rate. So at this point, we've got 3 of these 4 runes that are clearly better than the 4th rune, which is this one. Now this rune right here, this is a super efficient rune. This is going to add, generally speaking, a triple grindable rune adds 21% efficiency. So this rune will be 103% efficiency if it's fully grinded. That's a really good rune. But if I compare it to its peers and I say, is this rune better than my worst rune? It's not. The 4 runes that I have that are most similar to each other, this is the worst of those 4, which means it's the one that's least likely to get used because I will have to build at least 4 violent monsters that all need about 15 speed before I'm able to use this. And we know that I cannot build 4 violent monsters because once again, guys, I have 2 freaking slot 6s. And obviously you can use other sets for slot 6, but just the general point, I'm short on slot 6 in every rune set. That's always the bottleneck. I think it's the bottleneck for a lot of people. And knowing that I have to farm a lot more Dragons B12 before I can build 4 monsters, I can once again assume that I will get a rune that's better than this because it's not super fast. It's not super strong in any one category. This was basically split rolls. So it's really unfortunate that we wasted a max roll HP gem here. But it is what it is. It's not the best of my runes. And if I have to sell runes to make inventory, make space to farm better runes, then this would be the target for me. And all of that brings us back to the 8th and final rune, which is simply don't be afraid to sell runes. That is the biggest problem I think a lot of people have. We get locked up because we think, oh, what if I need this rune someday? What if? There are no what ifs. The runes that you're selling, guys, are never runes that are really gonna matter. Because here's the thing. You're not selling your 30 speed runes. I sure hope you're not. You're not selling your quad roll crit rates. You're not selling the runes that are truly unique. What you're doing is comparing the runes that are pretty generic. They're generic good runes, because we've already sold the bad runes. We've already sold the mediocre runes. What we've got is a bunch of good runes. But 700 good runes at the end of the day, they're all kind of the same. Like, this rune's got 4 less attack, this rune's got 4 more HP, but we're putting all the sets together. So it doesn't really matter. Like, if one rune has more HP and less attack, the next rune has more attack and less HP, you put them together and it's the same thing. You're not going to miss these runes. You will agonize over some of these decisions. You can agonize over some of these decisions for minutes. I'm going to say minutes. Some of you maybe hours, but, you know, for way too long. Way too long. If you put too much thought into it, you'll drive yourself crazy over a rune that at the end of the day is not that important. The important runes, we know immediately when we see them. When you quad roll that Swift Speed rune, you know you're never going to sell that rune. When you quad roll crit rate, crit damage, you know, when you have an amazing rune, you know you're never going to sell it. That's going to wind up on the monsters that you use the most. The runes we're looking at today, if they ever get out of my inventory, are going to wind up on monsters that I use once a month. And at the end of the day, is it honestly that big of a deal if the monster I use once a month has 2% less HP because I made the wrong decision between 2 runes? It really doesn't. On top of that, if you keep so many runes, you never have enough mana to plus 15 stuff. And if you're, for example, keeping all of these runes but not plus 15 in your slot 5s, the 600 HP you're losing by not plus 15ing that rune is more than the 2% HP you saved by having both of those runes to choose from. Truly, don't be afraid to sell a rune, even if you make a mistake, as long as the rune that you sold is one that was similar to others that you already have, you'll never miss it. On that note, guys, this video was honestly way longer than I thought it would be, but I really hope you guys found it useful. Hope you like the new layout, by the way. And as always, you know, just hope you enjoyed the content. I appreciate your support, and we'll see you next time. Hey guys, if you're still with me to this point, then that means that you probably liked the video, found it entertaining, or even better, both. So please smash the like button, hit the subscribe button, and leave a comment down below, because those things help the channel grow, and more importantly, they show me that the video is useful, and that's the whole reason I do this in the first place.